mandate that the truth be told. Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
And welcome back to the program with me, Basil Valentine, in for Patrick Henningsen. Today, Friday, the 9th of February, 2024. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by one of Patrick's regular contributors, Matthew Lee of Inner City Press, who is in the Lower Manhattan Courthouse in New York, an expert on all things litigious in the United States. I've got one burning question for you, Matthew. Are Trump's legal troubles going to scupper his chances in November, or will he prevail over what seems to be a sustained campaign of lawfare by his political opponents?
Well, it's a complicated question. There's a lot of moving parts. I try with Patrick to cover some Trump, but other legal cases. But this week, Trump has taken over everything. Yesterday was a Supreme Court argument. This is sort of the first barrier. This would be a more serious barrier than whether people would vote for a convicted felon or not. It seems to me one of the questions. There's no bar about a felon being president, by the way, and there's also no bar on somebody serving as president from prison. So be aware of that. Although there are many Republican voters who've said they would vote for him today, but if he's convicted of a felony, they won't. Whether that could change based on how it plays out, I don't know. But the first and a sort of an existential threat to his candidacy was this decision by the Colorado to take him off the ballot. And this was followed by a couple of other states, basically saying, and this is it may be of interest, this goes back to the Civil War, as many things in the U.S. do. After the Civil War, there was a 14th Amendment, which most people think of as being, ending slavery and providing due process. But it also had a Section 3, which said that no insurrectionist could serve in office. There was a procedure to get your insurrectionist tag removed, and it definitely seemed clear that if you were part of the Confederacy, you were an insurrectionist. And so it was an attempt to not allow, basically they thought that Jefferson Davis, who'd been the head of the Confederacy, might actually become president of the United States. So they wanted to bar that. Now it's being used now to say that given Trump's role in the January 6th attempt to stop the steal and protest or actually stop the voting in the Capitol, that he's an insurrectionist. Of course, that hasn't been found by any court, but Colorado said there's enough evidence, we're taking you off the ballot. So the Trump campaign sued, and yesterday were the arguments in the Supreme Court. I think I actually covered them. I live tweeted them, and they were kind of, it seemed even judges that are not Trump appointees at all were suspicious about the right of one state to basically just take somebody off the ballot. One judge, Gorsuch, said, another state might just want to take the other candidate, meaning Biden. They could take him off the primary ballot and leave this guy, Dean Phillips, as the winner. So they're going to rule, I don't know how soon, but pretty soon. So that was the first one. What I want to tell you is, rather than just go for the home run ball of what's going to happen, this was followed by some absolutely amazing, it was an amazing day, honestly. I had to drop some of my usual court coverage because after the Supreme Court argument, Trump spoke sort of on the fly from Mar-a-Lago in Florida on his way flying to Nevada they were doing a caucus out there, which he won like 98-1. Nikki Haley wasn't even in it. But he commented on the Supreme Court. This is how intertwined the courts and the politics have become. He commented on the case that it was beautiful. It was a beautiful argument. He trusts that they'll do the right thing. And then in the mid-afternoon, I'm going to set this all up, and then we can get into like what's happened to America. In mid-afternoon, a special counsel that was appointed to look into Joe Biden taking documents to his garage about Afghanistan and other classified documents said that they won't bring charges. But what was key is the reason he said. He said, if we were to bring charges, a jury would see an old, well-intentioned man with a faltering memory. So this gave rise to, like, on the right, people saying he's unfit to serve. If he's unfit to be put to trial, he's unfit to be president. And at 7:45, Biden did a press conference, impromptu, hadn't been planned in advance, and basically tried to prove that he's competent. And it didn't go well. He said on Gaza, he said, I talked to get the gate of aid open to Gaza, I talked to the president of Mexico, Sisi. This is a famous line that he said. And this gave rise to a lot of, anyone, it's a malapropism, but it seemed to be more fundamental. So and this is the point I was actually trying to get to. For some reason, I usually stick to the courts, but I was live tweeting this Biden thing because I thought he would talk about the Supreme Court decision and say, he's an insurrectionist, should be taken off. Instead, this gave rise to, among Biden supporters, outrage that somehow he was being made to, that just by transcribing what he said, somehow he was being made to look bad, that this was very unfair. And I want to just say, not that it matters, but I do Trump's things too. And he said some pretty, he very quickly says like all migrants are criminals or from mental institutions, which people think, some are, but not all are. So whatever, people say things, but to call the president of Egypt the president of Mexico was a big gaffe. And so I think you're going to see ripples from this. So you basically are left with the possibility of a showdown in November between possibly a by then convicted felon, because the felony could also be in New York State, where he's charged with doctoring business records to pay off a porn star to not undermine his 2016 run. That could be, it's a light felony, but it's a felony. You could have a showdown between a convicted felon and an apparently significantly senile incumbent. And it's amazing that this is certainly, maybe militarily, maybe economically, the most powerful country on earth, and these are the two options. But it appears that that's what we're headed toward.
Yes, it certainly does. Trump doth bestride the Republican Party like a colossus,
Totally.
if I can use that paraphrase. And it seems that he's bulletproof when it comes to these legal cases. Obviously, he's got his own army of lawyers and the funds to pay them all. One way
Sometimes
or another,
not very good lawyers. I just want to for the purposes of this, there's a lot of his lawyer in the Supreme Court was extremely well versed and had done many Supreme Court decisions. So maybe he's getting smarter now and choosing. I don't want to say that the only good lawyers are kind of established. You might be against the swamp, but when you're dealing with the courts, you kind of want to go swamp if you want to win. And you need a big swamp creature to fight the other swamp creatures. I mean, you at least want to have somebody
who's going to take on King Kong.
Yeah, or Mothra. His mistake sort of in the case hearing had against E. Jean Carroll, one that resulted in an $83 million verdict against him for sexual assault or defamation about sexual assault, is that his lawyers, I thought they were kind of brass. They were very Trumpian. They kept fighting with the judge. They kept objecting to everything, but it apparently didn't do much with the jury. And so they're saying that he's having second thoughts, that he might be anti-swamp in at least most public things in terms of like who he embraces on the campaign trail. But you might want to get a little bit more swamp on your legal team. And the Supreme Court one did it. But so there's another case pending, which is, and people are very interested in it. It's a New York State civil fraud case. Again, this won't disqualify him. Nor will a felony conviction. I want to say that he doth bestride the GOP, but the two primaries so far, or the caucus in Iowa and the primary in New Hampshire, exit polling of Republican voters have said, yes, they support him now. But if somehow, I don't know if it's just a kind of a palliative to themselves. They say if he's convicted of a felony, that's when they step off the Trump train. But it'll be too late if he has the nomination. What are they going to do? Vote for Biden? So it might be the lowest turnout election ever. I'm predicting a under 50%, maybe under 40%, because even the people voting, many of them are saying they're holding their nose. There are definitely very fervent Trump supporters, and I converse with them routinely, and I find them actually kind of. This is something I wanted to. I was planning the difference. And if you just live tweet kind of the transcript, not opinionating, but just like, here's what these guys are saying. Here's what the court debate is. You end up getting feedback from both sides. I found yesterday that the Biden defenders kind of much more like angry. I mean, I think maybe they're feeling, I don't know what it is, but they seem to demand a kind of an airbrushing of their candidate. Like, don't make him look bad. It's cruel to actually transcribe what he says. Whereas it's exactly what I do with Trump. And the funny thing is that the Trump supporters love what he says. The Trump detractors say it's all garble. It's just word salad. It doesn't mean anything. He's just a con man. And it's based on the same. I mean, again, that's politics. It's based on the same thing. The same thing took place in the trial. the Carroll trial, where the Trump lawyer Alina Habba would fight with the judge. She'd say, "Your Honor, this is so unfair. My client is," and he would say, "Sit down, Ms. Habba." The Trump people said, "You see, the court system is unfair. Revolution," and the Trump haters said, "What a bozo lawyer. They should all be put in jail." So this is where we're at in the USA in 2024. Sorry to go on, but it stirs me up.
Well, it's the most bizarre electoral cycle in modern American history, surely.
I think it's true.
And I'm from a much less litigious country in the United Kingdom. The idea that somebody would get $83 million on the defamation case is absolutely off the charts. Can you enlighten me as to where American courts get that kind of figure from?
Sure. Well, most of that was punitive damages, and I think the difference here.
Right.
I was actually, and I guess it's allowed. I mean, let's say you were suing Exxon, right? You say, so Exxon poisoned a town and 20 people died. The lawyer would say, this is why Exxon would probably settle the case, because at trial, a lawyer would say to the jury, Exxon has billions of dollars. This is just a footnote. It's just a rounding error. If more than just compensating the 20 families who lost their breadwinner, if you want to really send a message to Exxon, you better clean up and not do it again. You have to hit them where it hurts. And if they're a $40 billion corporation, you've got to deliver a verdict of $1 billion. And that's happened sometimes. And sometimes appeals courts say that's too big. You've gone too. You see, there's two kinds of damages. There's compensatory, like what did it actually cost the person damaged? And then you allow, which maybe other countries don't, and this is why we have such a litigious society, because it can be very lucrative to be a plaintiff's lawyer when people are killed by a train exploding in Ohio or smoking cigarettes, right? Or there's going to start being cases about social media use. You turned my kid into a zombie. There's a lot of sports betting is a new frontier for mass litigation, basically saying you addicted people and it cost them money. And then you go beyond. You say you hurt people to the tune. In the case of E. Jean Carroll, they said that it would cost her $12 million. It's a lot of money to repair her reputation. I don't know how they came up with that number. They had an expert. It's incredible, right? And they had some precedents. They said Martha Stewart, if you remember, she was like a broadcaster about home improvement, a big, and it's convicted of insider trading. When she got out of jail, she paid somebody millions of dollars to kind of rehabilitate her image. So they seem to have this, although their expert admitted that she'd never done a reputation restoration campaign, But so that's how you get. I've heard that in the UK, though, it's very easy to sue for defamation. Maybe you just don't win much, but that's why people don't publish stuff there, is because you don't have, even if it's true, you can lose. You tell me.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, fortunately, I've never been sued, and I've never had cause to sue anybody for defamation.
Sure.
Yeah, you don't win anything like that kind of sum of money.
Right.
There've been some heavy libel.
It's just for your right.
Yeah,
Sorry,
there've been some heavy libel payouts in Britain in the past, where in particular, Private Eye, the satirical magazine, used to take delight in pushing the libel laws as close as it can. Anything in particular else there in New York, Matthew, that's taken your attention this week? What else is towards the top of your inbox? I
will say, I didn't know we'd get. There is a case that's sucking all the air, all the oxygen out of the New York City political realm, and you can probably find these videos online. It was an incident that took place about 10 days ago in Times Square. As you may know, New York City has become the host for many migrants, and it's a very political issue. The Republicans want to close the border. They say the Democrats want people to come in so they could be naturalized and vote for them in the future. In any event, there's a lot of people crossing the border. And the governor of Texas said, we're not going to be the only ones suffering here. So he puts them on buses, and they're bused to New York. At first, people in New York were like, immigrants are welcome here. And they started putting people up in hotels that were empty because they were emptied out in COVID. So in a way, it almost helped the economy. It was sort of like, if New York could get federal money for all of this, it would be economically, if not safety wise. And this is the weird thing. Like, I didn't know it would play out this way. I'm totally willing to accept that there are people fleeing Venezuela either because they feel they're oppressed or more likely because there's better economic opportunities in the United States. This is the history of the United States. People come, you don't have to be waving a political refugee flag, but it does seem that now Trump says, this is, I'm going to tie, it's all, you'll see how it plays, the two play together. Trump says it's that countries are flushing their toilet, as he puts it, and emptying out their jails and mental institutions into the United States. And this did happen under Jimmy Carter. You may remember that Cuba, at one point, Jimmy Carter was so human rightsy that he said, we're a beacon of freedom, we'll accept anyone. And at that time, Fidel Castro was like, oh, really? So they took like not just political prisoners, but just every country has its own criminals. And they just dumped them in Florida. And Jimmy Carter at first was like, this is incredible. This is like 1959. They're fleeing communism. And it was like, no, these guys are setting up massive drug rings in Florida. And so I can't say that's what's happening in New York, but there's this is something that happened. The police tried to arrest, they said that these guys were robbing people in Times Square. And it turned out that they were kind of a group of about 8 young men, mostly from Venezuela. But the cops from the footage seems to have known them as kind of like a problem on the street and told them to move on. They didn't. They talked back. They tried to arrest one of them, whereupon he struggled. The 2 cops went to the ground. And the 7 other guys came up from behind and started kicking the cops in the face, in the back. And this is something that even as a person covering the South Bronx, it doesn't really happen here. You definitely have gunplay. Cops get shot sometimes, but you don't have a kind of a feeling that you could just kick, like, I don't know, maybe that's how it works over there. So people were shocked, even people that are very liberal or very pro-immigrant or pro-hospitality or charitable or religious people. They were like, this is too much. And this is where the politics come into it. Recently, kind of in the wake of the George Floyd protests after the murder, and I'll say the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota by the police, New York State passed very liberal bail laws. It's basically, the presumption is no one is held in prison after arrest pending trial. So these guys were caught on film kicking the cops in Times Square, were released. And many of them took advantage of another New York City program, which is that New York City doesn't want to have to pay to put these people up forever, so they're willing to give them free transportation to go elsewhere in the U.S., which is exactly what Governor Abbott is doing, right? So these particular people caught on film kicking the police in the face, fled New York City on government-paid bus tickets, and are now can't be found anywhere. So it's a huge fiasco for the district attorney, who's the one going after Trump. Everything comes together. Alvin Bragg. He's under fire, even by the Democratic governor of the state for having let them go. He then responded yesterday with a press release showing that the cops were a little out of line in how they arrested the guy, which I think it's true. I look at the video, you can't hear the sounds. You don't know what was said, but they definitely grabbed the guy. Next thing you know, he's on the ground. But this still doesn't legally, or even kind of just to the eye, it doesn't justify the guy's. I think the cops had no idea that would happen. Like it's like a different culture, sort of, And I think that there's now all kinds of like New York Post, Rupert Murdoch's newspaper stories about migrants stealing phones and using them to access your bank information to buy a swimming pool in Ecuador or Venezuela. So there's a lot of, and this may or may not be true, but the video is true. It is true that outraged, I guess, at the arrest of their friend in Times Square, they kicked police from behind and then were let out of jail. Never jail, were let out prior to any jail and fled and will never be caught. And so this is New York. This is New York politics right now. Everyone is trying to like back away. The DA is doubling down and saying, I let them go because the cops had acted badly. The mayor is trying to say, I'll get to the bottom of this because nobody wants to. And so there's just in the suburbs of New York, there's a race on Tuesday of this week to replace George Santos, who was a congressperson elected that then it turned out that he lied. This whole campaign, he said he was Jewish, he was not Jewish. He said a lot of things. I mean, it was like he didn't lose his office. He was impeached. He was actually forced out of the House of Representatives because he made claims. It turned out that he used campaign money to buy Botox, it's an incredible case. George Santos, he's still being prosecuted in the Eastern District. So you have a race now between a very swamp-like politician called Tom Suozzi. He used to be the Nassau is like Long Island, it's suburban, county executive. He's a Democrat. And you'll love this, the Republicans have come up with a kind of a test tube candidate, an Ethiopian Jewish woman named Maza Pillock, who was in the Israeli Defense Force. And this is an issue. So it's a twofer in New York. She's number one pro-Israel, which is very popular, other than in a relatively small fringe, but very vocal fringe of very progressive people that are pro-Palestine. Even liberals in New York, many of them are pro. I don't want to get into the religion of it, but it's you will not find a politician in New York City that's pro even like Abbas and Palestinian Authority, other than like AOC. There'd be one. So Swazi is like, I'm just as tough on Israel. He flew to Israel, and he's also saying that he's tough on migration and that he would actually get a deal done, whereas Maza would just be pro-Trump. And the allegation now is that Trump is the one letting the migrants in because he blew up the immigration bill. I don't know if you heard about that, but the Democrats and some moderate Republicans came up with a bill to increase funding for border security. And Trump let it be known that any real Republican should vote against it. That's when you say he's astride it, it's not just the polling numbers. He's basically, at this point, controlling what the Republicans in Congress do more than he used to. Because his polling numbers, if you're polling that high, most Republicans are not going to cross you because they're going to get primaried, So he's blown up. There's going to be no immigration legislation between now and the presidential election. And what he's trying to say is that it will only get fixed if I'm elected. So this is how it all kind of pieces together. It's a jigsaw puzzle of third rail red meat issues, with a lot of like bit players, caught in the flotsam.
And do you think any worthwhile legislation at all is going to get through Congress between now and November? It seems like it's just about the most no chance. No.
The only thing that will be done.
Well, there'd be no chance of anything being done to help the American people.
No, not at all. I think the only thing that will get done is aid to Israel and probably aid to Ukraine. They got linked together, and the Republicans. Here's what it is: many Republicans are suspect of continued and increased aid to Ukraine. They have a sort of America first. They believe that there's a lot of corruption there. So many of these things are true. They also believe, which is a very America first position, that the Europeans are not carrying, including, I guess, the UK, but definitely Germany. Germany is a big bugaboo for Trump. The idea is that they're not really carrying their weight, that America is pouring in billions to defend Ukraine from Russia, and Europe, which is much closer and probably at greater threat, is not carrying enough weight. So the Republicans have decided they don't really want to keep funding the Ukraine war, but they do want to fund Israel. So the Democrats who control the Senate package the two together and say you can't have one without the other. You can't help Israel without helping Ukraine. That's been now split apart. I think that they'll get both. I think they'll get Israel aid first and then something for Ukraine, but it's not going to be what Ukraine thought it would be. And it's, from what I've heard, that you would know better than me, but the on the ground military is starting to sort of turn in the Russian direction more than it was. Whether that just may be, something said to get more money, but it seems to be happening. And I think I have to say there is no question that Russia has benefited from from what Hamas did and Israel's response to it, because all of the focus, for example, at the UN, which is an organization I despise and banned from, but at the UN, you don't even hear about Ukraine anymore. Like, Ukraine was the flavor of the month for a year. It's totally off. It's like gone because the Palestine and the genocide is being created by Israel and is the only thing that you hear in the UN. So it's great for Russia, and Russia is actually able to position itself as the defender of human rights. For example, recently when the U.S. did its strikes in Syria and Iraq to respond to the killing of the 3 American soldiers at Tower 22 in Jordan by Iran-backed militias, Russia called an immediate meeting and said, America's violating international law. This was an attack on civilians. This is destabilizing. And it's getting a lot of traction. A lot of countries in the middle that were starting to be strong-armed into like the pro-Ukraine position are now swinging back the other way. So I guess politics is corrupt everywhere, but it's particularly toxic right now in the United States. That I could say.
I couldn't agree with you more. Finally, Matthew, very quickly, believe it or not, the only other candidate in single figure odds to become next president of the United States is Michelle Obama. She's 7-1. You only get 7 or 9 times your money if you back Michelle Obama. Do you think there's any chance that they're going to ditch Biden over the next few months?
He may ditch himself.
Surely, if he keeps making these gaffes, he can't go on if he carries on gaffing like this.
I agree. I think because there are people saying he's not competent today, but it's hard to imagine that's going to be any better in 4 years if he were reelected.
Exactly.
I don't know. People dream, and I think he said yesterday, I'm the most qualified person. He'll only leave if he wants to leave, unless I'm missing something. I think that, he's earned it. He's earned the right to babble and drool through the next 4 years. That's the campaign slogan. It's not a winner, but it might just win. It could.
Matthew Lee from Inner City Press, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
I'm Basil
Valentine,
in for Patrick Henningsen. I'll be back on Monday, and have a great weekend. See you all then.